The rain came down on Savannah like it had a personal vendetta against the world. It hammered the tin roof of Thompson's reliable repair with the kind of persistence that made you wonder if it would ever stop, or if this was just how the sky was going to be from now on. Endless, relentless, unforgiving. Marcus Thompson didn't look up from the engine of the Chevy truck in front of him. He'd stopped paying attention to the weather about 6 years ago. Right around the time he became the only person in the world that mattered in his daughter's life. Since then, rain was just rain, just another obstacle between him and the things he needed to get done. His hands moved through the engine with the kind of confidence that came from doing something 10,000 times. The serpentine belt was fraying at the edges. The alternator connections were corroded. They had the particular look of neglect that suggested the truck's owner had been too busy for maintenance. Marcus understood that. He understood being too busy. He understood what it felt like to let things slide, because there was always something more urgent, always another person depending on you, always a reason why your own needs could wait. The garage around him smelled like rust and possibility. That's what Marcus called it anyway. Possibility. Everyone else called it grease, oil, metal, the mustiness of concrete floors that had absorbed decades of automotive work. But to Marcus, it was the smell of freedom. He'd bought this building 6 years ago, with every dollar he'd saved from working under other men's hoods, learning their trades, earning their trust, biding his time until he could build something that was entirely his own. Thompson's Reliable Repair sat on the corner of Elm and 5th in Savannah, Georgia. It wasn't much. 2 service bays, a waiting area with chairs he'd salvaged from a church donation pile, a coffee machine that worked correctly on exactly 1 day a week, usually without warning. The sign out front was painted by hand, faded now from 6 years of Georgia sun and salt air, but still readable, still honest. What had taken Marcus 2 years to build looked like it had been here forever. That was the idea. That was the whole point of doing things right, making them look inevitable, like they'd always been meant to be. He'd learned that lesson from his mother. She'd worked 3 jobs to raise him after his father died when Marcus was 16. 3 jobs. And she'd still made sure he did his homework, made sure he knew his own worth, made sure that when he looked in the mirror, he saw something worth protecting. She'd passed away 7 years ago, right before he'd bought the garage. He liked to think she would have been proud of what he'd built here. The bell above the door chimed. Marcus didn't look up. Customers came and went. That was the business. You couldn't let every interruption pull your attention away from the work in front of you. Not when the work was what paid for everything else. The house, the bills, the specialized learning center that Amara attended 3 days a week. The routine that kept his daughter's life stable and predictable and safe. Back here, he called out. His hand still moved through the engine with practiced efficiency. "Give me just a second." The footsteps stopped somewhere behind him. Close. Close enough that Marcus could hear the wet leather of expensive heels dripping onto his concrete floor. The sound was almost musical. Expensive shoes giving up their water droplet by droplet, surrendering to gravity, to humidity, to the inexorable pull of Savannah's climate. When Marcus finally turned around, wiping his hands on the rag that lived permanently on his shoulder, he had to do a double take. There was a woman standing in his garage who absolutely did not belong in his garage. She was soaked through. Water cascading from a tailored jacket that probably cost more than his rent. Designer heels. He knew they were designer because Amara's mother used to point out designer heels in magazines with something like hunger in her voice were dripping onto the concrete floor, like they were committing some kind of sin. Her phone was in one hand, her car keys in the other. Her face had that particular expression of someone who had been having the kind of day that doesn't get better. It only gets worse. But it was her face that made his breath catch. He knew that face. He'd known it 15 years ago, when it belonged to a girl who sat 2 rows ahead of him in Mr. Coleman's history class. A girl he'd been too intimidated to talk to, too aware of his own place in the world's hierarchy to imagine she'd ever look at him with anything other than polite indifference. Sophia Caldwell. Except that wasn't right. Not entirely. This woman wasn't the girl he remembered. Something had changed. Everything had changed. The cheekbones were sharper now, more defined. The way she held herself was different, more controlled, more guarded, like she'd spent the last 15 years learning how to turn herself into something harder and more useful. Her hair was cut in a way that suggested serious money, and her bearing had the unmistakable quality of someone who'd spent a long time in a world where they mattered. Marcus, she said. And it was her voice that finally confirmed it, though it sounded different too. Lower, older, like it had learned things the younger version of her voice would never have known. He straightened up slowly, suddenly aware of the grease that streaked his forearms, the oil stains on his work shirt, the permanent darkening under his fingernails that no amount of scrubbing could touch. He'd stopped trying to hide it years ago. The grease was part of him now. Integral, unchangeable. Sophia, he said carefully, needing to hear her confirm it, because part of him was still waiting to wake up. Part of him suspected that this was just some trick his exhausted brain was playing on him. Some fantasy his 6 years long drought of human connection had conjured up. She was looking at him with an intensity that made something shift in the air between them. Recognition, definitely. But there was something else too, something that looked like need. "I can't believe you're here," she said, still in Beaumont. "It's Savannah, actually," Marcus said, because it seemed important to correct that, to establish that he'd done something with his life, even if it was just a reliable repair shop in a small southern city. "And you're soaked." "My car died about a quarter-mile up the road," Sophia said. "I barely made it into your lot before it completely gave up." As if on cue, lightning forked across the sky outside, illuminating her face for just a moment. In that flash of light, Marcus saw something that broke his heart a little. The exhaustion underneath the composed exterior. The particular kind of tiredness that came from running towards something for so long that you forgot why you were running. "Let me take a look," Marcus said. Because that's what he did. He took a look at broken things, assessed the damage, figured out how to make them whole again. The car was a silver Honda Accord, the kind of practical vehicle that made sense for someone who'd been living a practical life. It had over 150,000 miles on it. The check engine light was definitely on. Had probably been on for months, maybe longer. The kind of warning that people ignored until ignoring it wasn't an option anymore. Marcus pulled the hood open. He immediately knew what the problem was. The timing belt was about to fail. The spark plugs were shot. The whole engine was essentially running on fumes and prayer, which seemed like a metaphor for Sophia, standing there in her designer heels and tailored jacket, in his garage, in his life, after 15 years of being completely absent from it. "It's going to take a few hours," Marcus said, not looking at her, focusing on the engine in front of him. Because looking at her felt too much like looking at something he wasn't supposed to want. "I can get started on it now, or you can wait." "I'll wait," Sophia said. She said it quickly, like she'd been waiting for the question, like the answer mattered more than it should. They didn't talk while Marcus worked. He was aware of her watching him, aware of the intensity of her gaze on his hands, on the way his body moved through the familiar choreography of engine repair. He'd gotten used to working alone over the past 6 years. Amara would sit in the waiting area doing her homework or drawing pictures, but she understood to be quiet. Marcus had taught her early that work required focus, that he couldn't protect her and fix cars at the same time, that they both had their jobs in this partnership they'd built. But Sophia watching him was different. It was like she was trying to read something in his movements, some answer to a question she hadn't asked yet. After about 20 minutes of silence, broken only by the sound of tools and rain, Sophia said, "So, you own this place?" "6 years now," Marcus said, not looking up from the serpentine belt he was examining. "Bought it with everything I'd saved. I remember you," Sophia said. "In high school. You used to fix Mr. Bradley's truck." The one that was constantly breaking down. Marcus allowed himself a small smile. "That truck should have been scrap metal. I was amazed it ever ran." "It ran because of you," Sophia said. And there was something in her voice that made Marcus finally look up at her. Something that suggested this wasn't casual conversation. This was a confession wearing a question mark at the end. She was looking at his hands, specifically at his hands. "You were always good with your hands," she said, and the words hung in the air between them like something alive and dangerous. Marcus set his wrench down carefully. "Why are you really back in Savannah, Sophia?" She looked away first, which told him everything he needed to know about what the real answer was. "Got back about 3 weeks ago," she said finally. "I'm staying with my cousin Michelle over on Magnolia Street while I figure things out." Figure things out. That was one of those phrases that contained entire novels. Marcus recognized it because he'd used it himself, years ago, when people had asked him how he was doing after Amara's mother left. It meant I'm broken and I don't know how to fix it. It meant I made decisions I'm not ready to explain. It meant the life I thought I wanted isn't turning out the way I planned. "How long are you staying?" Marcus asked. "I don't know yet," Sophia admitted. "As long as I need to remember who I am, or maybe to figure out who I'm supposed to be next." The rain intensified outside, drumming against the tin roof with renewed urgency. Marcus realized he'd made a mistake, leaving them alone in the garage, trapped together by the weather and circumstance, and 15 years of history that neither of them had addressed, because addressing it would mean admitting that something had changed between them. That something had always been there, waiting. "You look different," Sophia, Marcus said. "I mean good different. You look like you grew into yourself." It was a safe compliment. "Neutral, professional. You look exactly the same," she replied. "Liar," Marcus said. But he was smiling. "I mean it," Sophia said. "Same person who sat 2 rows behind me in Mr. Coleman's history class. Same steady hands, same quiet way about you, like you knew something the rest of us hadn't figured out yet." The ghost of his younger self laughed at that. The Marcus of 15 years ago would have been astonished to hear that Sophia Caldwell had noticed him at all, let alone noticed that he was quiet, or steady, or any of the things that had eventually become the foundation of the man he'd built himself into. "Sophia," Marcus said slowly, "why did you come here to the garage? Of all the places in Savannah, why here?" She was quiet for a long moment. The rain continued its assault on the roof. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled like something alive and angry. Because she said, "I remembered you. And I needed to remember what it felt like to be around something real." Part 2. The Confession. Marcus had learned a long time ago that every person carries their own specific gravity. Some people pull you down, some people lift you up, and some people, the dangerous ones, do both at the same time, until you can't tell the difference between falling and flying. His mother had taught him that lesson. Though she'd never put it in those exact words, what she'd said was, "Baby, you're going to meet people in your life who make you want to be better. And you're going to meet people who make you want to disappear. And you have to know the difference, because your life depends on knowing the difference." Amara was the gravity that pulled Marcus down and lifted him up at the same time. She was 9 years old, brilliant in the way that children who see the world clearly are brilliant. And she carried the particular kind of burden that came from being raised by one person who never wanted to hurt her, but sometimes hurt her anyway, just by being tired. Amara's mother was named Jasmine. Marcus tried not to think about Jasmine, which meant he thought about her every single day. She'd left when Amara was barely a year old, not in anger, not with drama. Worse, she'd left quietly, with the precision of someone who'd made a decision and wouldn't reconsider. There'd been a note on the kitchen counter, 4 sentences. The first said, "I'm not ready for this." The last one said, "I'm sorry." Marcus had read that note until the paper tore at the creases. He'd read it so many times that he'd memorized every word, including the ones that weren't written. What it meant was, "I'm not ready for you. I'm not ready for this version of a life. I'm not ready to be the person you need me to be." He hadn't chased her. Men don't chase women who've already decided to stop running toward them. Instead, he'd picked up his daughter, crying because her mother wasn't there for nap time, and made a promise. A promise that was probably foolish. "I will be enough for both of us," he told her. He'd been trying to prove that promise true ever since. The routine was everything. Wake at 5 in the morning, get Amara's bag ready, her specific brand of sensory tools, the weighted lap pad the occupational therapist had recommended, the detailed schedule of the day written out, because Amara did better when she could see what was coming. Breakfast at exactly 6 o'clock. Ride to Bright Horizons Learning Center by 7:30. Work at the garage from 8 to 5. Pick up Amara by 5:15. Dinner on the table by 6. Homework at the kitchen table every night. Bedtime routine. Then finally the moment Marcus could sit alone in the dark and think about his own life, which felt less like living and more like existing in service to someone else's survival. He'd been okay with that. It was the trade-off he'd accepted. When you have someone depending on you, you don't get to have wants. You don't get to take risks. You don't get to open yourself up to anything that could potentially hurt them. Because hurt them and you break the promise. And breaking the promise means you failed at the one thing that was supposed to define you as a good man. That had been the arrangement for 6 years. Work, provide, protect. Work, provide, protect. So consistent it felt like meditation. And then Sophia Caldwell came back to town. But before that happened, there were other things Marcus needed to know about Sophia. Other things that would make what happened next make sense. Sophia had left Beaumont 15 years ago with the kind of single-minded focus that suggested she was running from something. Rather than running toward anything, she'd gone to an elite college on a scholarship. She'd gotten a degree in finance. She'd landed a job at a major real estate development firm in Atlanta. She'd climbed the ladder with the kind of determination that suggested her survival depended on it. She'd become the kind of successful that looked impressive from the outside. The kind of successful that involved corner offices and 6-figure salaries. And a fiancé named Brandon who came from old money, who had the kind of surname that opened doors in places Marcus had never been. What nobody knew, because Sophia had gotten very good at not telling people, was that she was dying slowly, not physically, spiritually, emotionally. With every achievement she felt less like herself. With every promotion she felt more like someone else was wearing her skin, doing her job. She tried to explain this to Brandon once. She'd said something like, "I don't think I'm happy." And Brandon had looked at her like she'd suggested something ridiculous. Like happiness was a luxury they couldn't afford. Like success was supposed to feel like success, even when it tasted like failure. 3 weeks ago, Sophia had finally walked away. She'd packed some things, told Brandon she needed time to think, and driven to Beaumont without really knowing where else to go. Her mother lived there. Her mother had been disappointed in her ever since she'd rejected the idea of marriage into more old money, and had instead chosen this man, this Brandon, who represented a different kind of possibility, a possibility that involved staying small, staying local, staying away from the life her mother had planned for her. When her mother had heard that she'd left Brandon, she'd called immediately. The conversation had lasted 17 minutes, and in those 17 minutes, her mother had managed to communicate Without saying it directly, that leaving a man like Brandon was a form of self-sabotage, that Sophia was confused, that she needed to go back to Atlanta and fix this. Sophia had hung up the phone and driven directly to Almond Fifth because she needed to remember what real looked like, and the most real thing she'd ever known was Marcus Thompson, who'd been quiet and steady and competent in a way that suggested he actually knew who he was and didn't need to perform that knowledge for anyone else. When she saw him under that truck hood, grease on his forearms and focus on his face, she felt something crack open inside her chest. She felt the possibility that maybe real was still available to her. Maybe real wasn't something she'd sacrificed on the altar of success. Maybe real was standing right in front of her, in a garage, in the rain. The rain that had started around noon showed no signs of stopping. Marcus worked steadily on Sophia's Honda, not because he was rushing to get her out of his garage, but because staying busy kept him from thinking about what her presence meant, or what her words meant, or the way she was watching him while he worked. Like she was trying to read something in his movements that he wasn't saying with his words. "I remember you," Sophia said, after they'd been working in silence for about an hour. "Before today. I remember you from high school." Marcus kept his hands moving through the engine. "We didn't really know each other." "No, but I knew of you," Sophia said. "Everyone knew about the guy who fixed cars in the parking lot during lunch. The quiet one. The one who never tried to be anything other than what he was." "I was just trying to earn money," Marcus said. "Mr. Bradley needed the work and I needed the cash." "That's what I mean," Sophia said. "You had something I was always trying to find. You had certainty about who you were. You had the sense that fixing things, actual broken things, was important work, even if nobody was celebrating you for it." She stepped closer to the car, closer to Marcus, and I was trying so hard to be someone important, someone that mattered, and I never once questioned whether the path I was taking would actually make me happy. I just assumed that if I worked hard enough, if I achieved enough, if I accumulated enough success, then eventually I would feel like I deserved to exist. Marcus finally looked up at her. "Did you feel like I deserved to exist?" Sophia laughed, but it was a hollow sound. "No, I just got more successful at pretending, better at performance, more efficient at hiding." They didn't talk much while Marcus finished the major repairs. He realized partway through that he'd started timing his movements so that she could see what he was doing, explaining each step, letting her watch while he replaced the spark plugs, demonstrating how the new belt would run. It was like he was trying to show her something important, like he was trying to prove something. After about 3 hours, the car was roadworthy again. Marcus drove it around the block to make sure the engine was running smoothly, and when he came back, Sophia was standing exactly where he'd left her. Like she'd been counting the minutes, waiting to see if he'd actually come back. "All fixed," he said, and he meant both about the car and about something bigger, something that neither of them was saying. "How much do I owe you?" Sophia asked. Marcus did the math in his head. Parts and labor and overhead. He could have charged her less because of their history. He could have charged her more because her car had been a complicated repair. Instead, he charged her the truth. $80, he said. She pulled out her wallet without hesitation, handed him $100, told him to keep the change. She was someone who'd lived in the world where money didn't mean scarcity, where you could hand someone more than they asked for, without doing the mental calculation of what that would cost you. "Would you?" Sophia said, and then she stopped, reconsidered, started again. "Would you like to have dinner sometime with me?" It was the kind of question that carried a lot of weight. It was the kind of question that could change things. Marcus understood in that moment that saying yes meant opening a door he'd kept carefully locked for 6 years. Saying yes meant risking Amara's peace, risking his own carefully constructed equilibrium, risking the possibility that Sophia would leave again, that she'd remember who she was supposed to be, and realize that Marcus and his small life would never be enough for her. But he also understood that not saying yes meant spending the rest of his life wondering what would have happened if he'd been brave enough to take the risk. "Okay," he said. "Yeah, dinner would be good." She smiled, and it was a smile that contained 15 years of wanting something she couldn't have. Marcus took Sophia to dinner 3 days later, once the weather had cleared and the sun had returned to Savannah like it had never left. They went to a small restaurant on River Street. Nothing fancy, because Marcus didn't do fancy. They sat at a corner table. Sophia ordered wine and fish, and somewhere during the appetizers her phone started buzzing. She ignored it the first time. The second time it buzzed, she glanced down, and Marcus saw her face change. The color drained from her cheeks. Her hand went tense around her wine glass. "You okay?" Marcus asked. "It's Brandon," she said quietly. "My ex-fiancé. He's not accepting that the engagement is over." The phone buzzed again, and again, and again. By the time their main course arrived, there had been 7 messages. Sophia finally opened them and read through them. With each one, Marcus watched her shoulders curl inward, watched her make herself smaller, like she was trying to hide from the words on the screen. "He says I'm confused," Sophia said, her voice small. "He says that when I'm back in Atlanta, I'll realize this was just a panic attack, that I was overwhelmed by the engagement planning and I needed space. He says that a mechanic in a small town will never be enough for me." "What do you say?" Marcus asked. Sophia looked at him with something like gratitude in her eyes. Not for the question, but for the fact that he'd asked it. That he cared what she said. Not what Brandon said. Not what her mother said. Not what the world said she should want. "It's true anymore," she said slowly. "I don't think I need to be with someone impressive. I think I just need to be with someone real." Marcus reached across the table and took her hand. Her fingers were cold, like she'd been holding them in ice water, but they warmed up in his grip. "Tell me about him," Marcus said. "About Brandon. About what made you think you needed to be with him in the first place." Sophia took a long drink of her wine before she answered. "He was everything my mother wanted for me. Rich family, Ivy League education, impressive job. The kind of man who opened doors. When he showed interest in me, my mother was thrilled. And I thought that if my mother was happy, then I should be happy. That her approval was worth the cost of pretending to be someone I wasn't." And Marcus prompted. "And I realized that being impressive to other people isn't the same as being honest with yourself," Sophia said. "And I'd spent so long being impressive that I forgot what being honest felt like." The phone buzzed again and again, but Sophia didn't look at it anymore. She just held Marcus's hand across the table and let the messages pile up, unread and unanswered. She was making a choice. Marcus understood that. She was choosing to ignore the voice of the world. The voice that told her she was supposed to want certain things, be certain ways, marry certain men, and in making that choice she was choosing something harder. Uncertainty, risk, the possibility that she might be wrong, but at least it was her choice. A week later, Marcus realized he needed to introduce Sophia to his daughter. Not because he wanted to complicate things, but because Amara was the most important person in his life. And if Sophia was going to be in his life, then Amara needed to know that, needed to understand it, needed to have the space to reject it if that's what she wanted to do. He picked Amara up from Bright Horizons on a Friday afternoon, and instead of going straight home, he drove to the garage. Sophia was already there. She'd started coming by after her remote work hours to spend time with him. She was sitting in the waiting area, working on her laptop. When Amara came through the door, Amara took one look at Sophia and immediately went into protective mode. "Who is this?" Amara asked. stepping closer to Marcus, her hand finding his. "This is Sophia," Marcus said, an old friend from high school. Amara looked at Sophia with the kind of penetrating gaze that only 9-year-old children could manage. She was assessing her, trying to figure out if Sophia was the kind of person who would hurt her father, or the kind of person who would just disappear. "Hi, Amara," Sophia said carefully, recognizing the scrutiny for what it was. "Your dad's told me about you." "What did he say?" Amara asked suspiciously. "He said you're the smartest person he knows," Sophia said, "and that you see things other people miss." Amara considered this. Then she turned to Marcus. "Are you going to marry her?" The question landed like a bomb. Marcus felt his face go hot. Sophia's eyes widened, and Amara just stood there, waiting for an answer, like she'd asked what Marcus wanted for dinner. "I don't know yet," Marcus said honestly. "We're just getting to know each other." "You should know," Amara said. "That mom left when I was little, and I don't want that to happen again." Marcus crouched down so he was at eye level with his daughter. "I know," he said. "That's why I want to be careful about who I let into our life. And if Sophia is going to be part of it, then you get to decide whether that's okay, because your opinion matters more than anyone else's." Amara looked at Sophia. "Do you promise not to leave?" "I promise that I won't leave because something better comes along," Sophia said carefully. "But I also promise that I won't make promises I'm not sure I can keep. And I won't pretend to be someone I'm not. Because the thing I've learned is that pretending is what makes people leave." Amara seemed to accept this as a fair answer. She took Marcus's hand and said, "Okay, but can we get pizza? I'm hungry." They went to Marcus's house, a small place with 3 bedrooms, the third one being Amara's art studio, where she spent hours creating elaborate drawings and paintings. While Marcus made dinner, Sophia sat with Amara at the kitchen table and watched her draw. "That's beautiful," Sophia said about a half-finished painting of a tree growing from a book. "What's the story? Stories grow from books," Amara said matter-of-factly. "And if you water them with attention, they become real." Sophia looked at Marcus, and he saw something in her expression that he hadn't expected. He saw her envisioning a future. He saw her imagining what it might look like to build something real with a man and his daughter. He saw her starting to believe that maybe she didn't have to choose between impressive and honest. Maybe she could just choose happy. After they'd eaten, while Amara was getting ready for bed, Sophia helped Marcus clean up the kitchen. They moved around each other with the kind of care that came from being people who understood the weight of responsibility, people who took things seriously. "She's wonderful," Sophia said. "She's everything," Marcus replied. "She's the only reason I haven't just given up on myself, on the future. She's the only reason I kept trying." "That's a lot of weight to put on a 9-year-old, Sophia observed gently. "I know," Marcus said, "and I don't want to do that anymore. I want to show her that adults can be happy too. That taking care of yourself isn't selfish. That the most important thing you can teach your children is how to live, not just how to survive." He looked at her directly. "Does that make sense?" "Complete sense," Sophia said. "My mother spent her whole life trying to teach me how to succeed, but she forgot to teach me how to be happy. And I don't think I knew the difference until now." Part 3. The Collision. 3 weeks after Sophia came back to Savannah, Marcus and Sophia stood on the back porch of his house after Amara had gone to sleep. The rain had come again. It was always raining in Savannah. Or about to rain, or had just stopped raining. But tonight it was just a gentle mist, the kind that felt like the sky was crying quietly, instead of shouting. "I need to tell you something," Sophia said. "Something I've been carrying around for a while." Marcus waited. He'd learned that sometimes the best thing you could do for someone was to let them find their own way to the words they needed to say. "When I was in high school," Sophia began, "I noticed you. Not the way everyone else did. Like you were just the quiet mechanic guy in the parking lot. I noticed you in a specific way. I watched you work on that truck. And I watched the way you moved like you knew exactly what you were doing. And I thought about what it would be like to be the kind of person you were looking at. Not impressive to parents, not performing for colleges, not trying to be enough for someone else. Just actually present in your own life. The words were coming faster now, like she needed to get them out before she lost her nerve. And I had a crush on you, she said. Junior year, senior year, probably even before that. I never said anything obviously because you didn't notice me. And that was fine. But I never stopped thinking about you. And when I saw you in the garage, I realized that the thing I'd been chasing for 15 years, success, importance, someone's approval, was not the thing that was going to make me happy. She looked at him directly, and her eyes were shiny with tears. I wish you were mine, she said. Marcus didn't answer immediately. He reached out and took her hand, and he held it while he thought about what it meant to say something like that. It wasn't just a confession of an old crush. It was a confession of a choice. It was her saying, out of all the things I could be, out of all the people I could become, the thing I want is this. You. This. Sophia, Marcus said quietly. Why are you telling me this now? Why not just leave Savannah and go back to Atlanta and get your old life back? Because I realized, she said, that my old life wasn't actually my life. It was my mother's life. It was the life Brandon wanted me to live. It was the life that looked good in pictures, but it wasn't actually mine. She stepped closer to him, close enough that he could smell the rain in her hair, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her body in the cool night. And the thing I realized is that what I want is this, she said. You, Amara, a small life, a real life. The kind of life where I can look in the mirror and recognize myself. Marcus pulled her toward him, and she came willingly. He held her while the rain misted around them, while the night sounds of Savannah settled in around them. He held her while he made a decision that he knew would change everything. Okay, he said, then stay. 3 days after Sophia made her confession, a black Mercedes pulled into the parking lot of Thompson's Reliable Repair. Marcus was under a car when he heard it. The expensive growl of an engine that had never done anything other than impress people. He finished what he was doing, took his time sliding out from under the vehicle, deliberately taking the long route back to the front of the garage. Brandon Patterson stood in the parking lot in a suit that probably cost more than Marcus's entire monthly earnings. His shoes were Italian leather. His watch was a Rolex. His bearing was that of a man who'd never had to wonder whether the world was going to give him what he wanted. Because the world always did. I'm looking for Denise, Brandon said. Not bothering with pleasantries. Marcus wiped his hands on the rag that lived on his shoulder. Sophia's not here. I know she's in Savannah, Brandon said. And I know she's been spending her time in this garage with you. So unless you want me to go to the cops and tell them you've been fraternizing with a woman who's suffering from a temporary mental breakdown, I suggest you tell me where she is. Marcus set his wrench down slowly. He didn't rush, didn't look angry, didn't give Brandon the satisfaction of seeing him ruffled. Instead, he just looked at Brandon with the kind of steady gaze that had made people trust him for years. She's at my house, Marcus said. Having lunch with my daughter. And I think you should leave. Brandon's face flushed. Your house? Are you serious right now? She's supposed to be with me. She's supposed to be in Atlanta planning a wedding, building a life that actually means something. Sophia's building a life that means something to her, Marcus said. That's what matters. And you think she's going to find meaning with you? Brandon's contempt was visible in every line of his face. You're a mechanic in a small town. You fix cars for people who can't afford to take them anywhere better. You have a daughter from a failed relationship. What exactly are you offering her that's better than what I can give her? I'm offering her honesty, Marcus said. I'm offering her the chance to be herself. I'm offering her something real. And I'm offering her a future, Brandon shot back. A real future, not playing house in a garage with a man who's never going to be able to give her anything but mediocrity. Marcus felt something shift inside him. Not anger exactly, more like clarity. This man was terrified. Terrified that Sophia had discovered that the things he was offering, status, money, the kind of life that looked good from the outside, weren't actually what made a life worth living. "I think you should go," Marcus said quietly. "And I think you should understand something Brandon said," his voice lowering to something more dangerous. "Sophia made a commitment to me. She accepted my proposal. She said yes when I asked her to build a life with me. And she doesn't get to just walk away because she's having some kind of existential crisis. She doesn't get to throw away everything we've built for some fantasy about a small-town garage. She doesn't belong to you," Marcus said. "And she never did, which is probably the thing you're most upset about." Brandon looked like he wanted to punch something, but instead he just smiled. A smile that was all teeth and no warmth. "This isn't over," he said. Then he got back in his Mercedes and drove away, leaving nothing but the smell of expensive cologne and the sound of an engine that had never had to prove itself. Marcus stood in the parking lot for a long moment, watching the car disappear. Then he went back inside to finish the work he'd started. The rain that had threatened all morning finally came. Sophia came to the garage that evening with her face pale and her phone trembling slightly in her hand. "He's texting me," she said. "He's saying all these things about how I'm confused, how I'm making a mistake, how my mother agrees with him that I need to come back to Atlanta." She showed Marcus the messages. They came in rapid-fire succession, each one more manipulative than the last. "You're not thinking straight. This is what happens when you're vulnerable. A mechanic will never understand the world you're supposed to be in. Your mother is disappointed in you." Marcus read through all of them without speaking. Then he handed the phone back to Sophia. "What do you want to do?" he asked. Sophia admitted, "Part of me is wondering if he's right. What if I'm making a huge mistake? What if in 5 years I look back and realize I gave up everything for something that didn't last?" "Then you'll have learned something about yourself," Marcus said. "And you'll have done it being honest about what you wanted, instead of pretending to want something else for someone else's benefit." He paused. "But that's not what I think is going to happen. I think you're going to stay and you're going to be happy. And Brandon is going to realize that he lost you because he never actually saw you." Sophia nodded slowly. She didn't call Brandon back. She just turned off her phone and asked Marcus if they could go pick up Amara early from her friend's house. When they got to Amara's house, the 9-year-old took one look at Sophia's face and said, "You're sad." "A little bit," Sophia admitted. Amara considered this while she gathered her backpack. Then as they were driving to Marcus's house, she said, "Miss Sophia, I have a question." "Okay," Sophia said, "ask me. Are you going to leave like my mom did?" The car went quiet. Marcus's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He kept his eyes on the road, giving Sophia space to answer without his presence influencing what she said. "I don't think so," Sophia said slowly. "But I also don't want to promise something I'm not completely sure about. Because I learned from watching your dad that the most important thing you can do is tell the truth, even when the truth is complicated. So you might leave," Amara said. "I might disappoint you," Sophia said. "I might make mistakes. I might get scared and do something dumb. But I won't leave because something better comes along. And I won't leave because it gets hard. The only reason I would leave is if staying was hurting me, and I'm not sure that's ever going to be the case." Amara seemed to accept this as a fair answer. That night, after Amara had gone to bed, she left a drawing on Marcus's pillow. It was a picture of 4 figures: Marcus, Sophia, Amara, and the cat they'd adopted from the shelter a month ago, all holding hands in front of the garage. The drawing was elaborate, detailed, clearly drawn with intention and care. Marcus showed it to Sophia. She made this, Sophia said softly, before we even kissed, like she knew how this was going to end. Children see things, Marcus said. They see the future better than we do, because they haven't learned to be afraid of it yet. Brandon came back 2 weeks later. He came during the day, in the middle of Marcus's busiest time, deliberately choosing a moment when Marcus was under a car, and couldn't leave immediately. Marcus heard the car pull up, heard the driver's side door open. He finished what he was doing, took his time sliding out, deliberately making Brandon wait. Brandon was pacing in front of the garage when Marcus emerged. He was in a different suit, even more expensive if such a thing was possible, and his face had the particular color of someone who hadn't been sleeping well. "Where is she?" Brandon demanded. "Sophia's at my house," Marcus said, "working. She's got a big project deadline next week." "I came to tell her that her mother is very disappointed," Brandon said. "That the family expects her to return to Atlanta immediately and resume her engagement. That this little experiment in small-town living is over." Marcus set his tools down carefully. He could have been angry. He could have been defensive. But instead he just felt sad. Sad for Brandon, who'd spent so much of his life believing that other people's approval was worth the cost of their own authenticity. "Sophia doesn't need anyone's permission," Marcus said quietly. "Not her mother's, not yours, not mine. She just needs to know that she's allowed to make her own choices." "And what exactly are you offering her?" Brandon's voice was dripping with contempt. "A life of mediocrity. A small garage in a small town. A child that isn't even yours to raise." Something shifted in Marcus's expression. Not anger, but a quiet kind of power. The kind that came from knowing exactly who you were and what you stood for. "I'm offering her the truth," Marcus said. "I'm offering her a life where she doesn't have to perform, where she doesn't have to pretend to be impressive or perfect or enough, where she can just be herself. And that's enough." "That's not good enough for her," Brandon said. "It's not good enough for you," Marcus corrected. "Because you need her to be impressive so that your life looks impressive. But Sophia's figured out that impressive is a cage, and she's not going back in." Brandon's face went through several shades of red. "You think you know her? You think a few weeks in a garage with you has given you any insight into who Sophia really is? She's a powerful woman, she's brilliant, she's destined for incredible things, and you're asking her to throw all of that away." "I'm not asking her to throw anything away," Marcus said. "She's choosing to redefine what incredible means to her. And if that doesn't match your idea of incredible, then maybe that's your problem, not hers." He stepped closer to Brandon, not aggressively, but with the kind of quiet certainty that suggested he wasn't going anywhere, and neither was the truth of what he was saying. "You want to know what really scares you?" Marcus said. "It's not that I'm a mechanic. It's not that I live in a small town. It's that Sophia realized that your version of incredible didn't make her happy, and that means the system you've built your whole life around the system that says more is better, bigger is better, impressive is better is a lie, and you can't handle that." Brandon looked like he wanted to say something else, something more cutting, something designed to hurt. But Sophia's voice cut through the tension. "He's right, Brandon." Sophia was standing in the doorway of the garage, a manila envelope in her hand. "I'm right about what Brandon asked, about all of it," Sophia said. She stepped forward, and Marcus could see the way her whole body had steadied. This wasn't the scared woman who'd arrived in Savannah 3 weeks ago. This was someone who'd made a decision and committed to it absolutely. "I've spent my whole adult life trying to be impressive to you, to my mother, to everyone else," Sophia continued. "And it made me miserable. It made me into someone I don't recognize. And I realized that the most impressive thing I could do was to stop pretending." She held up the envelope. "I turned down the job offer from your firm. I accepted the remote position instead. It pays less, but it requires less of my soul, which means I'm keeping the part of my life that's actually mine. Brandon's face went white. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious, Sophia said. We're done. The engagement is over. My decision is final. And if you contact me again, if you call, if you text, if you show up at my home or my workplace, I'm going to file a restraining order. She said it calmly, factually, like she was simply stating something that was obvious and true. Brandon looked between Marcus and Sophia, and something in him seemed to deflate. He realized in that moment that he'd lost her, that the things he was offering, his name, his status, his money, his version of impressive, weren't worth anything to her anymore. You're making a mistake, he said finally. Maybe, Sophia replied. But it's my mistake to make, and I'm done making other people's dreams instead of my own. Brandon left. This time Marcus didn't expect him to come back. The rain returned to Savannah that night, hammering the tin roof of the garage like it had something to prove. Marcus was cleaning up from the day, putting tools in their places, wiping down the workbench. Sophia was waiting for him in the office, sitting in the chair that had become hers over the past few weeks. When he finished, they walked together into the garage itself, the space where it had all started, the space where a woman had come in out of the rain with a confession and a broken car. And Marcus had realized that his carefully constructed life was about to change, in ways he couldn't predict or control. I'm scared, Marcus said finally. Sophia waited for him to continue. I'm scared that you're going to realize that you gave up too much, Marcus said. That one day you'll wake up and realize that my life isn't big enough for what you deserve. That the garage and the town and Amara and me aren't enough to fill the space where your ambition used to be. I'm scared too, Sophia said. Of what? That I'll disappoint you, she said. That I'll do something that reminds you why you closed yourself off in the first place. That I'll hurt Amara without meaning to. That this is all too big and too real and too demanding. Marcus crossed the garage and took her hands. He held them in his own, and he realized that they were no longer cold. They were warm now. They were becoming familiar. Sophia, he said, I've spent 6 years protecting myself by not wanting anything I could lose, by making myself small, by telling myself that Amara and the garage and my routine were enough. But they weren't. They were survival. But they weren't life. He paused, finding the words he needed. You came back and reminded me what life feels like, he said, and I'm terrified that you're going to leave again, but I'm more terrified of what my life would be like if I let that fear keep me from taking the risk. Sophia's eyes were shiny with tears. I'm not leaving. I know I can't promise that life will be easy. I know I can't promise that I'll be perfect, but I can promise that I won't run anymore. I can promise that I'm choosing this deliberately every single day. She pulled out her phone and showed him what she'd done. She'd deleted all of Brandon's messages. She'd blocked his number. She'd already looked into apartments in Savannah. Apartments with enough room for a second bedroom where she could work, where she could build a life. I'm staying, she said simply. I'm staying because this is the most honest choice I've ever made. Marcus pulled her toward him, and she came willingly. He held her while the rain hammered the tin roof, while the sound became almost musical, almost like applause. I wish you were mine, she said again, her voice muffled against his chest. You already are, Marcus replied. You were mine the moment you came back to Savannah. You were mine the moment you told me the truth about who you are. He pulled back just enough to look at her in the face. Welcome home, Sophia. She kissed him then, and it tasted like promise, it tasted like rain and possibility, and the particular kind of relief that comes from finally putting down the weight you've been carrying for far too long. Part 4. The Building. 5 weeks after Brandon left, the garage had become a different place. It was still the same physical space, the same 2 service bays, the same coffee machine that worked once a week without warning, the same concrete floor, but it felt different now. It felt like a place where things were built, instead of just maintained. Sophia had started coming by every morning with coffee from the cafe down the street. Real coffee, not the machine-made stuff Marcus had been drinking for years. She'd set up a small workspace in the office, where she could do her remote job while staying close to him. And during lunch, she'd sit with Amara and help with homework, or just listen while the 9-year-old talked about whatever was on her mind. Amara had warmed to Sophia gradually, not immediately, not in some grand gesture, but in small increments. She'd started showing Sophia her drawings without the protective skepticism that had characterized their first weeks together. She'd started asking Sophia for advice on things that mattered. She'd started to believe that maybe Sophia wasn't going to disappear. One afternoon, about 5 weeks after Brandon had left, Amara came to the garage with a poster board. She'd spent the afternoon drawing on it while Marcus was working, and now she wanted to show both of them what she'd created. It was a sign. Thompson's Reliable Repair, where broken things become whole again. She'd drawn cars with hearts inside them. She'd drawn Marcus under a car with a smile on his face. She'd drawn Sophia holding his hand. And in the corner, barely visible but clearly intentional, she'd drawn the cat looking smugly satisfied. "Can we put it up?" Amara asked. Marcus felt something catch in his chest. He looked at Sophia, and she was looking at the drawing with an expression that contained all the love and hope and wonder of someone who'd never believed they were allowed to want a family, and now had one. "Right here," Marcus said, pointing to the wall behind the register. "So everyone who comes in sees it first." They hung the poster together, the three of them, and when it was secured, they stepped back to admire it. The sign read, "Where broken things become whole again." It was supposed to be about cars, but they all knew what it was really about. Sophia had started wearing Marcus's work shirts on weekends. She'd gotten grease on them deliberately the first time, and instead of trying to hide it, she'd left it there, like a badge. Like she was saying, "I'm part of this world now. I'm not above it, I'm not transcending it, I'm choosing it." She hadn't moved in, not yet. They were taking it slow. Both of them careful about Amara. Both of them aware that building a family took time and intention and presence. But she was there almost every day. And she was becoming less the woman from Atlanta, and more the woman she was supposed to be all along. Sophia's mother called her monthly. She was still disappointed that Sophia had turned down the prestigious job. But something had shifted in those conversations. Sophia's mother had seen Marcus at a community event one afternoon. She'd watched him with Amara, watched the way he talked about Sophia, watched the way all three of them moved around each other, with the kind of care that suggested something real was being built. And very slowly she was starting to understand that her daughter's choice wasn't weakness, it was wisdom. The house was small, but it was theirs. They'd bought it together. Marcus, Sophia, and Amara, after about 9 months of dating. It needed work, but that was the point. It needed work, and they needed something to build together. Something that would be shaped by their choices, and their hands, and their commitment to making something real. The third bedroom was Amara's art studio, the second was Sophia's office, the master was theirs, and the kitchen was where they spent most of their time, which was fitting. Because the kitchen was where life happened. It was where they made decisions, had conversations, existed together without performance. Amara turned 10 during the first year, and her birthday party happened at the garage. It was her choice. She wanted to celebrate in the place where her father had built a life for them. In the place where Sophia had come back out of the rain with a confession and a broken car. About 15 of her friends came, and Marcus made his famous grilled chicken, and Sophia helped Amara set up games in the waiting area. It was simple and beautiful and real. Brandon hadn't contacted Sophia in months. The restraining order was in place, and he'd moved on to other things. His power over her was completely broken. When he did cross her mind, it was with a kind of detached sadness, like she was remembering a phase she'd gone through, a costume she'd worn for a while that didn't fit anymore. Sophia's mother had come to visit 3 times in the year since Sophia moved to Savannah. On her last visit, she'd watched Marcus help Amara with her science project, had seen the way Sophia laughed when Marcus did something silly, had understood finally that her daughter had made the right choice. On the last morning of her visit, she'd pulled Sophia aside and said, "I'm proud of you. I didn't say that enough when you were trying to be impressive, but I'm saying it now. I'm proud that you figured out what was real." Marcus's business had grown, not in the way that would impress people in Atlanta, but in the way that mattered. Word of mouth, reputation. People wanted to support someone who was building something authentic. He'd hired another mechanic, a young black man named David who needed a job, and who Marcus wanted to mentor the way he'd been mentored. He paid David fairly and created the kind of workplace where people wanted to work, where dignity was assumed, where being honest about who you were wasn't something you had to hide. The rain still came to Savannah. It came often. And when it did, it sounded like applause on the tin roof of the garage. Marcus had started to think of it that way. The rain as the world's blessing, the sound of something being washed clean, the possibility of beginning again. One afternoon, about a year after Sophia had come back to town, Amara brought a new drawing to show Marcus and Sophia. This one was bigger than the others, more detailed, more intentional. It showed all 3 of them working on a house together. The house had windows with light coming out of them. It had a door that was open. It had the kind of permanence that suggested it wasn't going anywhere, and neither were the people who lived in it. "That's exactly right," Sophia said, looking at the drawing with her arm around Amara's shoulders. Marcus kissed the top of Amara's head. And in that moment, with the sound of rain on the tin roof, and his family standing beside him, Marcus understood something that he'd spent 6 years not believing. He'd always thought that being a good father meant protecting Amara from pain, keeping the world small, making sure nothing bad happened. But being a good father actually meant showing his daughter what a real life looked like. It meant letting her see that adults could be happy, that taking care of yourself wasn't selfish, that love wasn't about performance or impressive or enough. Love was about showing up, over and over, choosing it, recommitting to it every single day. Sophia looked at him, and he saw in her eyes the same realization, that they'd both been broken in different ways. Him by abandonment, her by ambition. And somehow in the collision of their broken pieces, they'd learned how to build something whole. The rain pounded the tin roof above them, like it was celebrating too. Sometimes the right person doesn't show up at the right time. Sometimes they show up in the middle of a rainstorm, with a broken down car, and a confession that's been waiting 15 years to be spoken. Sometimes all it takes is 2 imperfect words, "I'm too," to change everything. This story is about 3 people learning that real is better than impressive, that honest is better than perfect, that the life you build yourself is worth more than the life someone else designs for you. It's about a child who sees the future before the adults do. It's about a man who learns that protecting his heart also means keeping himself from living. It's about a woman who comes home and discovers that home isn't a place, it's a person, it's people, it's the moment you stop running and start choosing over and over to stay. If this story stayed with you, subscribe to our channel. We tell stories about grace, second chances, and the quiet courage it takes to love well. Stories about ordinary people finding extraordinary things in the most ordinary moments. Because sometimes the broken things make the most beautiful repairs.